Hello, everyone. I wanted to tell you about two trips we're sponsoring this year. Part of our Geo Tours portion of the Skeptic Society is our social and science explorations. The first one is June 2nd through 16th, so 14 days, 2 weeks, from Ireland to Iceland on a cruise ship with none other than Richard Dawkins. This is the passage from Ireland to Iceland, we're calling it. And Richard Dawkins will be the invited guest and lecturer, where you can hang out with him for 2 weeks. As on this ship, the Vega, it has a guest of 152 people that can join. So it's not a big, huge cruise ship with thousands of people. So you get to intimate time with Richard. It starts in Dublin and goes to Reykjavik as we explore Europe's northernmost islands, Scotland's Hebrides, Orkneys, and Shetlands, Denmark's Faroes Islands, and Iceland. A remote world known for its rugged landscapes, picturesque villages, fascinating history, and nature lovers' delights. The second trip is from Greenland to Canada's Nova Scotia. We're calling this Wonders of the Arctic on the same ship, just a 152-person ship called the Vega. It's a beautiful ship. Our featured guest for that trip, which is September 23rd through October 10th, is Jared Diamond. Yes, Jared. So we have Richard Dawkins and Jared Diamond, two of the biggest names of our generation, two of the greatest minds, both good friends. Just picture just sitting on a ship, just hanging out with these guys. So, of course, they're lecturing, but breakfast, lunch, and dinner, they're just sitting around, and you can sit there and chat with two of the greatest minds of our time. This second trip, September 23rd through October 10th, goes from Greenland to Nova Scotia with a bunch of different stops in between. So check it out. Go to skeptic.com/geology_tours, or just go to our website, skeptic.com. You'll see it prominently on the homepage there. Again, skeptic.com/geology_tours to get access to those and sign up. These are big, fun trips. I mean, I've done a bunch of these myself. And it's just great to be able to spend so much time with such great minds of our generation. All right. Thanks for listening. Here's our podcast. My guest today is Mohamad Jebara, who is a scriptural philologist and prominent exegetist. Sorry for that. Known for his eloquent oratory style as well as his efforts to bridge cultural and religious divides. A semanticist and historian of Semitic cultures, he served as chief Imam as well as headmaster of several Quranic and Arabic language academies. Jebara has lectured to diverse audiences around the world, briefed senior policymakers, and published in prominent newspapers and magazines. A respected voice in Islamic scholarship, Jebara advocates for positive social change. Well, who could be against that? All right, Mohamad, nice to see you. Where are you?
Nice to see you. I am speaking to you from Canada with all the snow outside.
Are you Canadian?
Yes, I am.
So you were born and raised in Canada?
Yeah, my most of my life was in Canada, so I'm accustomed to the cold, but I don't think anyone ever gets used to the cold. You just
how does
tolerate it.
How does somebody born and raised in Canada become an imam? And let me read a little bit from your book here about your early childhood, which is quite unusual, that you memorized the entire Qur'an, not even knowing what the Arabic words meant. Sorry. So memorization involved processing sounds, melodies, and emotions. It also required extreme discipline, I'll say. I would lock myself in my room for hours, constantly repeating passages. To guide me, my teachers invoked a classic mantra of Islamic scholars. I won't try to say it in Arabic. Constant repetition leads to stability of memorization. Okay, so it took you months to build up muscle memory.
Say
that again?
التكرار يدعو إلى القرار. That's the Arabic.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, that's it. And here, let me just continue reading this. This is quite the unusual upbringing. By age 12, I had memorized all the Quran's words, yet understood few of them. A bit like repeatedly watching a foreign film without any subtitles, knowing the scenes in detail without comprehending the dialogue. My teachers began intensive sessions on Arabic grammar, syntax, and etymology, empowering me to at last begin to decipher what I was reciting. Okay, what in the world possessed you to do that?
Well, I do speak about it a bit in the introduction of this book, and also my previous book, Mohamad the World Changer. I talk about being born with this name, Muhammad, which I say I was given. I have lived with Muhammad my entire life. I was given his name the day I was born, but yet for years knew nothing about him. And with the Qur'an as well, I was a baby. On the first day I was born, my parents attached this small talisman, which was basically a miniature Qur'an, to my left side, over the left side of my swaddle, right above my heart. And they attached the same small miniature Qur'an to my siblings as well. And I always wondered what this thing was. I couldn't understand it. We had a Qur'an on the wall, hung up on the wall. Most of our families did. They would put it in a small pouch and hang it up on the wall out of reverence. We had passages from the Qur'an written in beautiful calligraphy, decorating people's homes, but we didn't understand what it was. So there was always a mystery surrounding both the Qur'an and its prophet. That's why I wrote these two books, and that's basically what led me on that quest. I'm always very curious, and when I don't understand something and I don't know something, I like to really explore the nuances of what it's about, not just understand it the surface. I like to understand the depth of what it's about. And that led me to become an Imam and to teach, because I realized that not only was I realized I wasn't the only one who didn't know this, that there were so many people who didn't understand it either, and they needed to understand it deeper, because it had a great impact on people's lives, and it can have both a positive and a negative impact if it's not understood properly, as we see around the world. So,
are your parents Muslim?
Yes, my parents are Muslim, but
and their parents, how far back did they go?
It's actually a very long story, but our families have not been Muslim for that long. It's only been several generations. My father's family were mostly Greek Orthodox and Catholic Christians. So most of the Jebaras are still Christian, actually, till this day. My paternal family descend from the Ghassanides, who I speak about in this book, Mohamad the World Changer. They were vassals of the Byzantines, and later on they became vassals of everybody else. But basically, they were Christian monarchs who lived near where the Golan Heights is today, and they lived in a city called Al-Jabiya, which overlooks Damascus. So one of the main gates in Damascus, which I also speak about in my books, called Bab al-Jabiya, is the door that basically the gate that faces the city of Jabiya. Now it's all in ruins, but that's basically where my family came from. And there's actually an airport in Kansas called Jebara Airport, named after one of my relatives, James Jebara. He was an ace. He was a pilot, an ace in the American Air Force.
And he was Christian?
And he was Christian. I have I have three half siblings who are Catholic.
Oh wow, that's so interesting. And do you have these conversations with them about religion? And do they ever say you picked the wrong one? You should have been a Christian? Or?
Well, I don't know. If they thought it, they never said it, but at least never in my face.
Okay, all right. Okay, let me stand in for ignorant Americans that don't know anything about the Quran or Muhammad or Islam, because I'm one of them. So let me just ask the dumb questions. Who wrote the Quran and why? What does it say? What's the purpose?
Well, according to Islamic tradition, the Quran was revealed through the medium of the Archangel Gabriel to the Prophet Muhammad. The Prophet Muhammad was illiterate. He could not even recognize his own name. He couldn't read and write. And he had scribes who actually wrote down the Quran. as he taught it to them, which is really fascinating because you'll find this book, the Qur'an, is composed from the memory of an illiterate and an unlettered man who never went to school. And the most fascinating thing is the editing process of the Qur'an, which a lot of people don't know, is that the Qur'an in its final form, the way we have it today, is not the way it was revealed. It was revealed at there was a chronological revelation across 22 years. And basically in the last 2 years of the Prophet Muhammad's life, he had it reorganized. So you have passages that were in one chapter were moved to another chapter, chapters were reordered, verses were moved all around. And, we take it for granted, but just try to imagine how massive this enterprise is. You can't read what you have written, but yet you remember it because he's like, oh, the passage so-and-so, put it in this chapter between these two verses, and he says it. And it's like, how do you do that? For us, because we're so reliant on books and writing and literacy, it's very difficult. I mean, that's part of the memorization process. So when I memorized the Quran, so when I wrote these 2 books, I wrote them from memory because that's what we were required to do. So all the information, the knowledge, I had to write it from memory. After the manuscripts were completed, then I went back to all the sources that I had mostly memorized.
So you used the oral tradition yourself?
I did. That's basically that's how we work. Because the way it works is, it's difficult for people who don't memorize to understand it, but your brain functions like a computer. Now, doesn't mean that, oh, wow, like I can remember everything. No, because I can't remember most people's names because it's fascinating. I can remember genealogies and ancient people's names, and I can give you the Prophet Muhammad's genealogy and his ancestors and who his father was and his mother and and all of these people. I could barely do that with my own family unless I have to consult something. So your brain selectively finds something interesting and you remember it. And a lot of people are like that. If they're interested in something, they're able to remember it. But in general, all the information that I learn, my brain categorizes it. So let's say I'm reading a random book and it mentions something about snow, for example. So my brain registers that piece of information under the category snow. So when I was writing these books, things that I had read, whether it was philosophies or whatever it was, other writings that had mentioned certain topics, my brain had categorized that information there. And when I was processing and analyzing information, you're able to connect things together and say, oh, that point's connected to this point. And when you memorize the hadith, which is the compilation of the sayings and the teachings and the tradition of the Prophet Muhammad, it's information, vital information and clues about his life are scattered throughout. How did he walk? How did he talk? How did he look? How did he interact with people? His personality, his etc. And then you gather all this information and then you fuse it together. And that's basically what I did in these books. I use it.
So as I understand it, the tradition believes that God, Allah, or Yahweh. By the way, are all Yahweh and Allah the same deity?
Yes. Yeah. It is the same God.
Yeah.
We believe in the same God.
And so God essentially dictates to the Archangel Gabriel, who then transcribes it to Muhammad. In what language did God speak to Gabriel, and how does this work?
Well, the mysteries of the divine we can't really understand, but what we do understand is that the divine inspires us. The way it's fascinating because the word the Qur'an uses to describe divine revelation is the same word it uses to describe how God teaches the bees. وَأَوْحَى رَبُّكَ إِلَى النَّحْلِ أَوْحَى. So أَوْحَى, this word is a fascinating word because it entails this. It's almost like God is putting these eureka ideas in your head. So so God does this with nature. God does this with people. So how it happens, we can't comprehend it. But these eureka ideas where we get, wow, this brilliant idea. That's basically how revelation works.
But the way you just said that sounded very song-like or musical. Is
Yes,
that part of the oral tradition? It's easier to transcribe those long poetic passages from memory if it's more of in a song-like or poetic-like structure?
Yes, we chant the Qur'an. Of course, the chanting of the Qur'an is not unique to Islam. The Jewish tradition did it before, the Hindu tradition. Basically, it makes it easier to memorize, and the rhythms. It's part of the the delivery process. And when we say delivery here, it's not just deliver in terms of delivering to an audience. So just like the pun, which is also, you're also delivering the information from generation to another. It's easier to remember something when when there's a ring to it.
Now, the fact that you're able to do this, write 2 books, well-received books, I read your reviews, from essentially memory before you actually wrote it down and fact-checked it and added footnotes and whatnot. So that would not surprise me that even an illiterate person like Mohamad, if he has scribes helping him, could do that by natural means without any supernatural intervention. Is that possible?
It's very possible.
Okay. Right. Interesting. And who do Muslims think Mohamad was compared to who Christians think Jesus was?
Well, I do speak about that a little bit in the author's note of the life of the Qur'an. Basically, for Muslims, the Prophet Muhammad, just like any of the other prophets, was just a human being. He's just a human being who is a conduit or a channel for divine inspiration, divine revelation, just like Moses. Muslims also believe in Jesus. Actually, Jesus is mentioned 5 times more than the Prophet Muhammad by name. So
wow.
He's mentioned more in the Quran. Mary is also mentioned in the Quran. She's mentioned 19 times. And the numerology is very fascinating because you know why? Chapter Mary in the Quran is actually chapter 19. And Mary, the mother of Christ, is mentioned 19 times in the New Testament. The mother of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
It's really interesting. Why is it chapter 19? Because there is a correlation in the numbers. Even when you look at chapter Yusuf is chapter number 12, because obviously that's 12 sons of Israel, right? 12 sons of Jacob.
That sounds like numerology to me.
Yes, there is a lot of numerology in the Quran. And that's a very Semitic thing. So the Semites love playing on numerology, playing on words. And the Quran is full of these examples. It's fascinating. And I do that as well. My books are full of numerological secrets. For example, the word 12 is mentioned 12 times in each of my books. You're not going to find it more than 12 times.
Did you do that on purpose?
I did on purpose. When the manuscript was completed, I actually I put in a whole bunch of secrets. My kids' names are in there. Well,
very good.
Their dates of birth are in there. Even though they actually correspond to actual dates that happened, I made sure to mention these because they were my children's dates of birth. So I want them to know that.
That's funny. I did something similar to that in my first book, Why People Believe Weird Things. In the index, I put on a certain page number, accurate predictions by psychics. And then you turn to the page and it's a blank page anyway.
I like that one.
Yeah. Okay. So, I debate a lot of Christians on the existence of God and Jesus and the resurrection and so on. One of the questions I like to ask them is why don't, if the evidence for Jesus' resurrection is so good and the arguments and so on, why don't Jews accept it? So let me ask you, why don't Muslims accept Jesus as the Messiah, as a Godhead, as 1 in 3 and so on and so forth? You said they mentioned Jesus a lot, but not as the Son of God, as himself a deity, right?
So why in chapter 2 of this book, that's an excellent question. I give you a comprehensive response to your question.
Go ahead.
And basically, in a nutshell, Muslims believe in Jesus as the Messiah. So the Quran calls him Al-Masih, which is the Messiah, which is Mashiach in Hebrew. And of course, it means to rub or to anoint. And the reason they call him a Mashiach or Masih or Messiah is because they would, in the past, the prophets or the priests would anoint the foreheads of the chosen, either the prophets or the kings, with holy oil. Usually it's a sort of a refined extracted olive oil that they would utilize. And that's basically where the concept comes from. And of course, the Quran also plays on the concept of Christ Jesus being the Messiah, Mashiach or Masih, because the word also doubles as the one who wipes away. So Masaha also means to wipe away, because say that Christ came to wipe away injustice. He came to wipe away villainy. He came to wipe away corruption, because also you can see from the New Testament, especially from in the Gospels, see that Christ was not, he was a reformer. He was there to combat aggressions. He was there to stand for and support the weak, the destitute, etc. So the Quran praises him in all of these and recognizes him in all of these amazing feats that he did. But the Quran confirms in many words that Christ was human. And so is Mary. The Quran glorifies Mary and glorifies the Quran, mentions Mary as being the greatest woman, where the angels...
But their belief is that Jesus's message was justice in this world, not in the next world, right?
Yes, basically the message itself calls for justice, and the Quran clarifies that justice, the teachings of Christ, are what we apply. Because if it's our duty as people, the same thing with the Quran, by the way, it's our duty as people to apply the teachings. The Quran or Christ or the Quran or the Bible, they're not going to come and do the work for us, because that's what we expect. You say, like the book will do the work for me. But no, the Quran says that you have to do the work. And this is that concept the Quran repeatedly evokes, the concept of taqwa, which is the equivalent of the Hebrew tiqwa or tikva in modern Hebrew, which is generally translated as hope, but it actually means action-based hope, because the concept refers to somebody pulling a bucket out of a well. So you go from one well to another in the desert seeking water. So you're looking for water and you're pulling the bucket. Maybe there'll be water there, maybe there won't, but you're trying, you're putting in the effort, you're trying to do the work. So it might have results, you might not have results, but you put in the effort. And that's what the Quran teaches us, that's what you need to do. That's the teachings of Christ. From the Islamic point of view, from the Quranic point of view, is the prophets don't come to save us. They provide us with guidance. They provide us with the know-how, with steps, with methodologies of how we can change our state. The Quran has this fascinating passage that the divine will not change the state of a people until and unless they change their inner outlook and perspective. So if you internally are negative and pessimistic and blah, 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 and waiting for somebody else to do the work for you, nothing's going to change. The Quran says you have to change the way you think, the way you behave, and you have to put in all the effort. Yeah, God will help you from the side, but God's not going to do the work for you.
So the emphasis is more on this world than the next world. The
emphasis is on the effort that you do, which is going to make this world a better place. And
yeah, I like that.
And will reflect in the afterlife.
But as you know, Christians emphasize very much the acceptance of Jesus as your Savior so you can be born again. John 3:16, for God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, so you may have everlasting life, and so on. I hear you saying that this is very different from what Muslims believe.
Yes.
What do Muslims believe about the afterlife?
We believe that, at the end of the day, whatever, if you want to call it salvation or whatever the concept is, that's something that we can't control. But what we control are the actions that we do. The Prophet Muhammad's cousin and also one of his scribes, actually his first scribe, Imam Ali, said something really fascinating in terms of defining the concept of what's faith. He says, ما وقر في القلب وصدقه العمل. So the reality of faith is what is deeply rooted inside your consciousness. And it's proven through the good works that you do. So faith is not just like, oh, I believe in something and I go and destroy the world. Faith is, if you are truly a person of faith, you're supposed to be, that's what the Qur'an teaches us, is that if you are truly a person of faith, then you do what is known as عَمِلَ الصَّالِحَاتِ يَعْمَلُونَ الصَّالِحَاتِ, which is you do acts of reparation for the world. You repair the world. The modern Jews use this concept, tikkun ulam. Obviously, this was not a concept that they used in the past. This is a concept that was influenced by Islamic philosophy and Islamic thinking during the Middle Ages, which is the reparation of the world. You make the world a better place. That is what really matters. Of course, we believe, obviously, in Islam, we do believe in life after death, but the concentration is you don't know what happens after. There's like everything that comes after death is an uncertainty. It is what we call ghaib. It is unknown. It's something we can't understand. It's a world beyond our world. So since it's something we can't understand, just like the divine, Imam Ali, the same person, says this fascinating thing. Al-ajzu عن الإدراك إدراك والتفكر في ذات الله إشراك. That recognizing your limitations as a human being, you recognize that you have limitations. There are certain things which we cannot comprehend or understand or fathom. We cannot understand certain things. Recognizing that is understanding. And recognizing that, trying to understand, okay, what's God, what's the divine, what's the afterlife? These are things you can't understand. We can't understand. Like Christ says, and of that day and of that hour knows no man, no, not the Son, nor the angels in heaven, but the Father. It's like, trying to guess when the world's going to end, or doomsday and doomsday prophecies and all this. Look, you're never going to know this stuff, so don't think about it. What you need to think about is what you're going to do in this world. Just like the Prophet Muhammad said, if one of you has a young plant, a sapling in your hand, and you see the world is about to end, you can see it. The world's going to end. I don't know. Maybe there's like a huge asteroid's going to collide with the earth or something, whatever, the world's going to end. And you have this shootling in your hand. He says, plant it. Because you cannot guarantee the future, but you can guarantee what you do. You put in the effort. You can't guarantee that you're going to have an outcome, but you put in the effort. That's what the Qur'an teaches. And you'll see it from the way I believe that the Qur'an is as a cure. It calls itself that. In the Qur'an,
that all sounds great to me, that we really don't know what happens after you die. Nobody does. So why not focus on this world? Because that's the world we live in. But as you know, there's at least some percentage of Muslims believe in the afterlife and this whole idea of martyrdom. This is what we hear in the news and so on because of terrorism. That they're, the land of milk and honey and 72 virgins and all that. Where does that come from? Is that from the Quran, or is that a mistranslation or a misunderstanding? Where do they get this idea, and how many people actually believe that?
Well, first of all, Islam is against taking your own life. Right? Islam values life, just like we see in the Jewish tradition, in the Mishnah, and quoted in the Talmud and other Jewish traditions about the taking of life and the salvation of life, that if anyone who takes one life, it's as if they have killed all humanity, and who saves one life as if they saved all humanity. That's in the Quran. I actually do quote that in the book as well, and explain about these parallels that you will see between the Islamic tradition and Judaism and Christianity. But a lot of these ideas are created much after the Prophet Muhammad. We see and I do speak about that in the book as well, which is this concept of the fabricated tradition. We call them al-mawdu'at, which are words and actions that are attributed to the Prophet, which he never said. And of course, anybody who's famous, and we can see that on social media, people always say, oh, they make up a quote and then they put somebody famous, they put their name, and people believe it. Okay, well, the question is, did they actually say that? And, so that's part of what we do when we study. Part of in traditional Islamic scholarship, we study the hadith. And we studied what is known, and hadith, like these traditions, have two components. We have what is known as the isnad, or the sanad, which is the chain of transmission. I heard it from so-and-so, from so-and-so, like verifying the source. And then we have what is known as the matn. The matn is the actual content of the tradition. What is actually being said. So we verify, okay, was this actually said by the Prophet? Is there a link? And could the Prophet have actually said that? So you see traditions, a lot of these traditions used by extremists or etc. Most of them are made up. They are lies. The Prophet never said them. They actually contradict the Qur'an, and they contradict our tradition. But people don't know that, because people don't know. It's like after September 11th. I mean, I was still young at that time. It was a long time ago. But people in the media were like, oh, chapter 9 in the Qur'an, verse 11. Sorry, I have to make fun of them. But,
Well, you do hear that. Yes.
Yeah. But chapter 9, verse 11, what is it talking about? Okay, talking about orphans. What does that have anything to do with your Twin Towers? People lied, and they got away with it. And it was in the media. News outlets were spouting this stuff, and people didn't challenge it. People didn't question it. And people lie all the time, and which is fine. That's how the world works. But then you go.
Well, it's not fine, but it's reality.
Well, in the sense that that's how it is. It's been happening, and I talk about it in chapter 1 on the chapter on language. I talk about how language is used to manipulate, which goes back to the earliest times. We see Pharaoh doing that in the Quranic telling of the story of Moses and Pharaoh. Pharaoh presents himself, the guy who enslaved the Israelites, who enslaved all of these people, presents himself as what? As a liberator. He's like, I have your best interest. I'm coming to say, I love you guys. He's telling that to who? To the Israelites. Telling, oh, Moses wants to enslave you. He's the guy. He's a bad guy. I love you guys. I have your interest. That's what the Quran is quoting him as. Like, does the guy actually believe it? I don't know. But you see, he definitely know how to do politics. But
interesting. Yeah. Well, your message needs to get out, and your book needs to be read by Muslims around the world. Can you explain Sharia law and to what extent it is accurately derived from the Quran, or it's modified or even butchered by local political leaders today?
Well, here, I'll show you, since we're on that topic. So here's basically what we call Sharia, basically what becomes our, we call it fiqh, the jurisprudence, our, way of understanding. So shara is the root word. Shara, the root word means to seek, to go up a mountain, seeking the source of fresh water. That's basically, it relates to the word Torah. So Torah, which is the teachings of the Torah, it comes from Yara, which also relates to the paths that are forged by rainwater. So it's always, you see, there's a connection to water as a source of life. So basically, Sharia is seeking the source of life. So what we have in Sharia are the things we call them maqasid al-Sharia, which is what is the purpose of the law? Why are these laws formulated? And the maqasid revolve around the following: the sanctity of life, so salvation of life, sanctity of society, sanctity of the environment, So Islam basically cared about the importance of environment. For example, part of our law is you can't urinate or defecate in water. You can't urinate and defecate beside trees, especially fruiting trees. This is that's what the law says. So if you look at the subject, they revolve around the following. You have al-ibadat, which basically are devotions. Our prayers, our fasting, like how we do our acts of spirituality. And the first of all of these, if you look in every single book, regardless whether you're Shiite or Sunni or any school of thought, the first part is what we call a-tahara. Tahara is purification. So how do you clean yourself? One of the first things Sharia teaches you is how do you clean yourself when you go to the bathroom? When you defecate, how do you clean yourself? Make sure that you actually do a good job, that there's nothing left. When you urinate, how do you clean yourself so that nothing's left, so you don't drip urine into your clothes? How do you washing your hands when you wake up from sleep, washing your hands before you eat, washing your hands after you eat? This is what it talks about. How do you behave with people? How do you interact? How do you write a contract? You have a business contract. How do you write it? Should you have witnesses? What things should you stipulate? That's what it relates to. Basically, conduct, how you behave as a person. How do you interact with other people? Marriage, divorce, charity. There's nothing here.
Just take something like homicide. Are there degrees of murder? First degree, second degree, third degree, the equivalent of that?
Yes, definitely. And sorry, just one moment.
And while you're doing that, since Islam is against the taking of a life,
yes,
how do you think about things like abortion or capital punishment or just war or self-defense, murder and self-defense, something like that?
Those are like each of those
hard problems. I know.
Need like an entire session to discuss. Yeah. Excuse me. Sorry. I have asthma.
Yeah, I understand. I grew up with asthma, so I'm sympathetic. But again, I guess what I'm asking is to what extent does the Quran really instruct on that, or is it modified over the centuries a lot based on what's going on in a particular region or political system?
So the Quran is very doesn't go into details. So all of the stuff I just discussed with you, the Quran doesn't give us these details. Doesn't tell us like these are details that are discussed, by scholars based on the needs of the people. So the Quran doesn't say, like, for example, the Quran talks about praying, right? The Quran says pray, keep a connection to God. The Quran does not tell us how to pray. There are no instructions. It alludes to people putting their face on the ground, like Abraham and Moses and all the prophets, like it does in the Bible. He fell on his face and prayed to God. That's how they translate it, which is like how Muslims put their face on the ground, because the Jews used to pray like that too, and the Christians. And doesn't give you the details of how to pray. So based on the school of thought, whether you're Sunni or Shiite, whether you're Ja'fari or Zaydi or Shafi'i or Hanbali or Hanafi, each school of thought has its own particulars of how the prayer is done. So for you as an outsider, you can't tell. So they all look all the same, all Muslims, right? So for me, when I see someone praying, I can tell what school of thought they are just based on the movements or what they say, and their sometimes even their political outlook, because now the modern political outlooks also impact how people pray. So all of that different, and of course, these things were developed over time. So a lot of the laws differ. The laws are really, if you look at the way that the ulama, the body of Islamic scholars, evaluates information, it's really fascinating how they think, and it really resembles the discussions you see in the Mishnah, the Jewish discussion or commentary and oral tradition, etc. The Talmud, these discussions where the rabbis are going, one rabbi is saying one thing, the other one's saying, like I remember when I was studying, we would have a hadith, which is a tradition of the Prophet, and there was one particular one I remember. I was 12 at that time. It boggled my mind. there were over 700 different opinions on what this could mean, or what this could imply, or how this could apply. People think Islam is a monolith. The Muslims are so diverse, and the power of the Qur'an is that the Qur'an in Semitic languages, you see that in the Torah as well, by the way, and even in the Aramaic speaking people, is that there are so many layers to something that they would say, so you can always extract so much. There's so many gems you can extract from one word, from one concept. So I was before we went into all of this, I was speaking about the Quran as a cure or a healing, because that's what it calls itself. So let's say
it calls itself a what? A healing?
It calls itself a source of healing.
Source of healing, yeah, okay.
شفاء للعالمين, شفاء للناس. It is a source of healing for all the world, for people, for all people. It doesn't say it's a source of healing for believers, for people of faith, but it's for all people. Because when you have a migraine or a headache, or you need a procedure, and you go to a pharmacy or you go to the hospital, the medicine is supposed to, at least in theory, work for most people, right? It doesn't discriminate. Well, this headache medication only works if you are white. Right. Oh, this only works if you are German. This actually only works if you are Jewish. Or this only works if you are a woman or a man or whatever you are. It doesn't work like that. It was supposed to work for everybody, at least most of the time. Does medicine work all the time for everybody? Of course not. There are certain people the medicine doesn't work with. And that's how the Qur'an is. The teachings of the Qur'an are supposed to give guidance and inner perspective and deeper perspective for people of all backgrounds, regardless of what you are. It's supposed.
Well, I like that universal message a lot. Can you explain the difference between Sunni and Shiite in my category of dumb questions? Is this scriptural interpretation differences? Is it a political split? What is that?
Let me put it to you this way: the classification of Sunni and Shiite is inaccurate, because you have, for example, the Zaydis, which are Shiites in Yemen, and you have the Shafi'ites, who are Sunnis, and you have the Hanbalites, who are Sunnis, and these three are close in jurisprudence, in their sharia, in their fiqh, in the way that they understand and apply religion. They're very close. Their outlook on the world is very, very close. On the other hand, you have the Ja'farites, who are the 12er Shiites, which basically, like the Shiites in Iran, Iraq, most of the Shiites are Ja'fari or Ithna Ashari, which are 12er. And then you have the Hanafis and the Malikis, and their jurisprudence is very close. So, that's how I would split it. So, from the point of view of law and interpretation of religion, this is how it should be split. Not Sunni Shiite, but
but would that be the case in Iraq, say?
Well, I mean, today, a lot of the way Muslims are informed, because most people don't know much about Islam. Mm-hmm. They're informed by the way the West has looked at Islam, not because that's what Islam is, and arguably a lot of what you call Islamic extremism is a product of Western academic systems, not a product of traditional Islamic systems.
Interesting.
And well, of course, because in traditional Islamic systems, we are taught, like when I was studying as a child and throughout my studies, all the teachers I studied from, they taught us all the schools of thought, both Sunni and Shiites. And you see even Shiite scholars, they study Sunni schools, because it wasn't supposed. You're supposed to study a broad range of fields. You're not supposed to limit yourself to just one school or one idea.
So would the analogy be, say, between Catholics and Protestants?
I would give you, on that level, I would explain it to you simply. The Shiites are like the Orthodox Christians. The Sunnis are like the Catholics, and what call themselves the Wahhabis or whatever. All of these, Puritan movements are like the Protestants. That's basically where you're. This is like the closest parallel you can find to Christianity in terms of the jurisprudence, in terms of the outlook, in terms of how they view the scriptures. The Shiites are much more, they look more on humility. You see, like Shiite clerics, the top clerics are extremely humble compared to, our people, the Sunnis. I even though I studied the Shiite tradition, but I was ordained within the Sunni tradition, and the Shiites are much more, you see, if you see like the top ayatollahs, they have very simple lives. They live extremely simple lives, and that's in contrast to, people on the Sunni side where they can live extravagant lives. And there's nothing against one or the other. That's a comparison, which you will see that the Greek Orthodox, or at least the Orthodox in general, tend to favor simplicity much more than the Catholics or the Protestants. The Protestants, especially evangelicals, they see like living in having a nice house, having a good life is a positive thing. So it's that outlook is how you can see the parallels. But that's just right now. But just mind you, it hasn't always been the case. Like the Muslim schools have evolved drastically. Like you have the Ismailis, like the Aga Khan Foundation, etc. They're some of the most they do philanthropy, they do charity, they're like anti-violence, but they were Ismailis in the past who were extremely violent. For example, the assassins, the Hashashin. I mean, the word assassin in English comes from Hashashin, and they were Ismailis. Like, so, just like you had Puritan movements 300-400 years ago burning witches, and now they're anti-war. So people change. So I think it's important.
Well, one way we think about that is that Christianity went through the Enlightenment and the Age of Reason and so on, and that Islam has not gone through something like an Enlightenment. Is that accurate?
That's absolutely ridiculous for anyone to say that, because the reality is Islam did the opposite. We had our Enlightenment when everybody else was in the dark.
Right.
Yeah, of course. If you
explain that, elaborate a little bit.
In both of my books.
Yeah, please.
If you look at the description of Bat in chapter 8, I describe it. You would be amazed at the level of sophistication of these people, how advanced they were, how open-minded. Yeah, you're gonna have individuals here and there who weren't. Always, there are exceptions, but I'm talking about as a general.
I know. In the history of science and math and technology, way ahead. So then the question becomes, what was the title of that book? What went wrong?
That would be a following book that I would speak about. But I do allude to that in the epilogues of both books.
But is that correct? Is it correct to say what went wrong? Did something go wrong?
I think a lot of things went wrong, and it's a combination of factors. It's not just one factor. In a nutshell, you have the biggest turning point is the destruction of Baghdad by the when the Mongols sacked Baghdad. They destroyed millions of books. You had the Reconquista happening in Spain as well, where millions of books were also destroyed. And when you look at the amount of books that were available in these libraries, you had this major center of learning in Lebanon, which obviously doesn't exist. It was completely destroyed as well during the Mongol sack, where just that one library had over 2 million manuscripts and books. The one in Baghdad had, we know of at least 5 million books that were destroyed in Baghdad alone. Think about Alexandria, all of these places where you had major centers of learning, and they're all gone. And what happens is, when the books were destroyed, a lot of scholars were also killed. And so with the destruction of the knowledge and destruction of the scholarly caste, if you want to call it that, what's left are the less educated people. And with time, that basically you have a chain reaction. So if you go in the Muslim world today, which is really unfortunate, if you have brilliant children, they become lawyers or doctors or engineers or whatever. I mean, that's what my parents wanted me to do, and I could have easily done that. My marks in the sciences were all in the high 90s. I'm the psycho that went to summer school for 1%. My children laugh at me for doing that. I had 99% in chemistry and I wasn't satisfied. So I went to summer school to get 100%. And everybody there had failed. So the teacher was going around asking each of us how much we finished with. And it was like, 22%, 30%. And then came to me and I refused to answer. They're like, was it that bad? I'm like, I'm not saying anything. The teacher looked like, you had 99%. What are you doing here? I'm like, I'm on 100%. But I chose to do this because I believe that the brightest minds, or at least people who are gifted, should be in the field of religious leadership to teach the people. Because what happens is when the people who are less gifted, the people who are less academically strong, are sent and pushed into religious learning, which is what happens in most Muslim countries. The kids who fail, the kids who are unenterprising, lack entrepreneurship, lack foresight, like, okay, let's send them to the religious school, send them to the madrasa, because, there are exceptions, but I'm talking about in general, unfortunately, that's what happens. And then you end up with the Taliban, for example,
Well, how do you think about people like the Taliban or Osama bin Laden or Mohammed Atta, who flew the plane into the South Tower? How do you think about them in terms of the Quran? They've misread it. It's a butchering of the real meaning, or they're political pawns being used by other people, or they're just mistaken.
Well, at basically whatever they believe in, whatever they think, it's not the Qur'an. That's a simple answer. Whatever they think. And it's really fascinating because a lot of these extremist movements, they quote Quranic verses, and the Quranic verses are actually saying the opposite of what they allege them to say. For example, there's this quote that was quoted recently where it said, enter the land, and if you do, it's like, that you will be victorious. And this verse is leveraged. But yet the fascinating thing about this verse is in the Quran, it speaks about the opposite. This verse speaks about Joshua, the son of Nun, and basically encouraging the Israelites to enter the Holy Land. So the verse is evoked to mean one thing, but in the context of the Quran, it's actually saying the complete opposite. It's actually referring to the Israelites' ties to the land instead of the opposite.
Is this part of your motivation for your work and your books, is to set your fellow Muslims straight on some of these misinterpretations or misreadings?
Well, I mean, let's go back to the concept of an imam just to help people understand. The word imam is basically the title of a religious scholar or an Islamic scholar.
Like a rabbi.
Mainly among the Sunnis, by the way. The Shiites don't use it. The Shiites use the word imam for only 12 select people. So when you hear if somebody has the title imam, automatically they're Sunni, they're not Shiites. Unless it's Khomeini, which is a very rare occurrence in the Shiite tradition where he took the title of imam, whereas no other Shiite before him had ever taken that title. It's usually reserved for the 12 select in the Shiite tradition.
So you're an imam.
Yes, I'm an imam, and the concept of an imam, and I do speak about it in the book. By the way, this is the book cover. And you can see there's a calligraphy.
I only have the galley, so I don't have the. But it does have it. I guess that's what is. This is that what that is?
No, that is actually in the Canaanite script, which is the Phoenician script.
Oh, okay.
And
you have several pages here. There must be.
Yes, and the second one is the Sabaean script, which is Southern Arabian script. So I wrote the first chapter in the Quran.
That one.
Yes, that's Sabaean script. That's Southern Arabian. That's from Yemen.
And then
this was written in Yemen like 2,000 years ago. That was that.
And then there's this. What is that?
And this is the evolution of the script. So my children actually, my son drew the pictures and my daughter wrote the stuff I want them to. But basically, you see the alif, the alif, which becomes the letter A. You see how it evolves from
and then there's
the image of
this. Yeah.
Yeah, so that is my, my dedication to God.
Okay. Okay. You dedicated it to God. Okay.
Yes.
Can you talk about the role of women in Islam?
Yes, I'd love to. Let me just quickly answer your question about
Oh,
Imam.
yeah, the other one. Yeah, yeah. Sorry.
The
Yeah.
Imam is the meaning of the word, going back to the root, is a particular kind of guide. It is a guide who guides people out of the darkness of caverns. So some people are trapped in caverns, in dark caverns. They're not sure how to get out of these, mazes. So the job of an imam is to guide people out. And of course, if people are stuck in a cavern or in a maze in a mountain, do you discriminate? Do you say, okay, are you a man, a woman, a Muslim, a Christian? Do you discriminate, or do you guide all people?
Well, hopefully the latter.
So basically, an imam is somebody who guides all people, not just Muslims. I mean, now it's reversed. Of course, people don't know that the first time the word imam is used in the Qur'an is to refer to the Torah. The Torah is called an imam because it guides people from darkness to light. Remember what he says, that he made like God made light, right? In the first chapter of Genesis. So because it guides people from the darkness of confusion to the light of certainty and understanding. That's what the Torah is supposed to do. That's its function. So the Qur'an calls it that. The Qur'an refers to Abraham as an imam, and it also refers to Jewish sages and scholars as a'imma, as imams as well, the plural of imam. So the Qur'an never refers to, it never uses the word imam to refer to Islamic scholars because they didn't exist at the time. So every time the Qur'an uses imam, it's reference to the people before us, the Jews, the Christians, the apostles of Christ, for example.
But I guess, Mohamad, what I'm asking is it your sense that your religion has gone off the rails? It's at least some people. I mean, you have 1 billion adherents or more, so you could have 100 million people, and that only be 10%, and that's still a lot of people that have misread or misinterpreted. So is this your goal? Like, I got to set these people straight. They're just not getting what the real message is here.
My goal is to revive what has been lost. I'm not a reformer. I don't believe in reform.
Okay.
So I'm not a reformer. I'm not a modernist. I'm not here to modernize Islam. I don't believe in any of that. Or I'm not trying to cherry pick or sanitize Islam. I don't believe in any of that. I don't respect that. I want to return it back. I want to purify. I want people to go back to the Qur'an, to what it actually says, and that's what I do here. Every time I deal with a topic, I don't say, oh, well, so-and-so says with it. No, I'm like, okay, what does the Arabic say in this verse? These roots, the root word of this word, what does it actually mean? What did it mean at the time of the Prophet Muhammad? Because language evolves. And it's fascinating, because 70 years after the Prophet's death, we are told that the Umayyad rulers, who are the first Muslim dynasty, the first people to establish a dynasty in the name of Islam, to be more precise, they could not understand the Arabic of the Quran anymore, because the Arabic had evolved so drastically that people coming out of Arabia who were still speaking the original Arabic, they couldn't understand them, and they were speaking Arabic. They weren't speaking a different language. That's how fast it evolved. And then you have this concept known as al-muwalladu fil arabiyya, which happens during the Abbasid period, where words that existed in the past are given new meaning because of the new circumstances. So if you read the Quran, especially now, people are like, oh, well, I'm an Arab. I'm born in an Arabic country. I know Arabic. I know what the Quran says. No, it don't. Because what the language, the words that you are using, they have a meaning. But the words in the Quran had a completely different meaning. I'll give you an example. So I'm an artist. I'm a visual artist. I love art, and obviously the artworks on the cover were done by me. I illustrated the book. I love art. And I think of myself more as an artist than anything else. Even when I write like an artist. When I perform like a service, I do it artistically. For me, art That's who I am. And when we go back to this concept of an artist, in modern Arabic, the word for artist is fannan. Fannan is the word for artist, right? I mean, you're like, oh yeah, of course I know that word. But anybody who knows modern Arabic or modern standard Arabic would be familiar with this word. Oh, fannan, yeah, that means an artist, and fan is art. But in the language of the Qur'an, fannan means a wild donkey.
What? Okay. So what's the point? I lost the thread. What's their point? What's the point here?
The thread is that a word. If you went to the Prophet,
misreading. Yes. Okay.
If you went to the Prophet Muhammad and says, "I'm a fannan," he's gonna say, "Are you okay? Do you need a psychiatrist or psychologist?"
I see. Okay.
You're identifying as a wild donkey. I don't know what to do with this. Or another example is qahwa. Qahwa is the word for coffee in modern Arabic. So in classical Arabic, in the language of the Qur'an, qahwa meant an extremely intoxicating beverage, something, a very strong alcohol, something like gin or vodka. It's very strong alcohol. But qahwa, coffee, is non-alcoholic. So if you went to the Prophet Muhammad at his time, he said, "Oh, I'm drinking qahwa," say, okay, you can't drink that because you shouldn't be drinking a strong alcoholic beverage. So the words definitely change, and I do speak about several things where misunderstandings come. Like you have this concept of irhab. In modern Arabic, if you look at the Arabic media, they always talk about irhabi. Irhabi becomes terrorist, or irhab is terror or terrorism. In the language of the Qur'an, irhab, and I do speak about it here, and Mohamad the World Changer, in the introduction, I refer to that concept, which is that irhab in the language of the Qur'an means to act in such a lofty, in such an inspiring way that you inspire awe and reverence in people. People like, wow, this person is so inspiring. That's irhab. But if you're reading the verses in the Quran that use that word, like, oh, it means to terrorize. No, it doesn't mean to terrorize. It means you must act in such an inspiring way that people want to be like you, not to be terrified by you. The word that the Quran uses, the classical Arabic Quranic word for terrorism, is irjaf, which most people don't even know. And it means to quake. Or to shake, that's where you get the concept of a quaker, because they quake or they shake. That is irjaf, is where you cause people to, they're so terrified they start shaking from the terror that you
would
cause.
This phrase Allahu Akbar that we hear so much about and have terrorists shout it, what does that mean? Is it one of these misreadings again?
And I do actually speak about that in Mohamad the World Changer. People should read this book too, because
it's a sequel.
Yeah, it is. They work hand in hand. Basically, what I've done is in Mohamad the World Changer, I zoomed into the Prophet Muhammad's life, and the Quran is like looming in the background. It's it's fuzzy, right? And then in this book, the Quran is focused, and Muhammad's life is fuzzy in the background.
Yeah, okay.
But they work hand in hand. I mean, and the Prophet Muhammad in his final sermon, he says, "I've left you with two things. If you hold on to them, if you understand them, you will never go astray. You will never fall off the path. The Book of God, the Quran, and my tradition, my way." And yet, like you said, because we have the Muslim world has really lost connection to its heritage of the Quran. Most people don't understand the Quran, or don't know what it says, or the Prophet's life. I wanted to make them accessible. I wanted them to become, known by people.
All right, Allahu Akbar.
So Allahu Akbar is a phrase that we use in our worship. This is basically what we use when we pray. And it is a reference that God is the one who constructs the world. He's the one who repairs the world. That everything beautiful in the world, God makes it even more beautiful. That's the concept of the beauty of Kabbara in Arabic, means to grow. It's to basically, God is a source of growth, of healthy incremental growth, not destruction. And I do speak about it in Mohamad the World Changer. the Prophet Muhammad never used the word Allahu Akbar in war.
Really?
The only time he ever used it is after Mecca had surrendered peacefully. So what the Prophet Muhammad declared is a holy peace, not a holy war. In contrast to the Meccans, the pagan Meccans who fought him, who made the fights they had against him a holy war. They're the ones who proclaimed "U'lu Hubal, U'lu Hubal," which is basically glorifying their deity Hubal, the idol that they worshipped, Hubal. So the difference is that Islam, and in the Qur'an, actually, I do speak about it in both books. It's chapter 9, the one everybody likes to, it's like everybody's scared of chapter 9. And I give you a long quotation from chapter 9, actually, so people can see what it actually says. And chapter 9, which is Surah At-Tawbah, which is the reconciliation. The chapter begins without evoking God's name. So the Quran has 114 chapters. In 113 of them, it has the word Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, basically evoking the name of the divine as God, as the source of all compassion, the source of all kindness, the one who optimistically has a vision of a better future for people, the one who is caring and comforting, the one who's a comforter, the one who provides presence. Only in one chapter does it not begin with that, and that's Surah 9, because its beginning says, you know what? The treaty of peace between us and you is now revoked because you guys massacred our allies. And you know what's fascinating is that the Qur'an's most angry chapter, verses, is angry because of the death, the massacre of pagans. The people who were killed were pagans allied to the Prophet Muhammad, killed by their fellow pagans near their holy sanctuary. So the Quran is angry that you guys have no regard for treaties or for peace.
Interesting. I had no idea about that.
I talk about it in both books. In both of these books, I give you the details. But basically, to use Allahu Akbar in war is actually a defilement of the name of God. It's actually disrespectful to the name of God, Islamic. You cannot use the name of God in these states.
Wow. That's really good to know. Since 9/11, there's been this ongoing debate. I haven't participated in it, but I track it. Why did they hate us? What was the cause of this? Was this a misunderstanding of the Islamic religion, or is it really not religion at all? It's really politics. Religion is secondary or tertiary. It's really has to do with U.S. foreign policy and Israel politics and U.S. troops in Holy Land, and the religion is a secondary to it. Or on the other side, they've just butchered this religion and they're mistaken, but it is religiously motivated. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a very complicated and complex situation. So it's a combination of several factors. Yes, there is the foreign policy issues, which is definitely a big part of it. There's also the history of colonization, which we're still suffering from. Drawing up lines, putting up fake borders and etc. Things like that just popped up without, people are just sitting there in Europe. Oh, let's draw a line here, but you're cutting it through strange, there was no regard for the ethnicity of the people, for the religions, for the languages. Who are these people? Like, you have the Kurds are literally divided among several countries. Like, how does that make sense? Etc. Or you have Arab speaking people in Iran, etc. So there was no consideration for who lived in these lands, or kind of like when the partition of India and Pakistan happened, like Bangladesh and Pakistan become like East Pakistan and West Pakistan. Like, Bangladesh has its own language, its own culture. Yes, they're Muslim, but they're very different than the Urdu speaking or Punjabi speaking, whatever, people in Pakistan. Even Pakistan, you have a portion of the northern part that are Pashtuns, that are basically part of the Afghan people. So you have all of these lines that are drawn that do, ultimately result in conflict. Plus the breakdown of our systems. For example, in North Africa, you had a lot of companies that were formed, corporations that were formed by Muslim women in the textile industry, in the formation of rugs and tapestries, etc. And when the French came, they're like, okay, we're not dealing with women. Like these companies have to be owned by men. So women were pushed out. And you had a lot of these strange rules that were created during the Victorian era, and segregation and things like that were not there in the Islamic world in terms of attitudes. And these were incorporated by Muslims. So you look at the Islamic world today, how many women are scholars? You can barely count them on your fingers. Whereas in the past, during the Golden Age, 40% of our scholars were women.
Really? Whoa.
Yes.
Wow.
And the majority, like you have, I do refer to several of them in these books. You have Darda al-Sughra, she was a major scholar in Damascus. And the Umayyad ruler, imagine that the Muslim ruler used to come to attend her class. He would sit on the ground like everybody else.
And this treatment of women you see, say, by the Taliban, this is, again, another complete misunderstanding of the Qur'an and the history of the religion.
Of course. You have Bibi, the best example is Bibi al-Harthamiyya, who was the Mufti of Kabul during the Middle Ages. And you have several other women who ranked in different places around the Islamic world. I do mention several in my books, so if you want to read more, you can read more about it. But basically, the Prophet Muhammad actually assigned a woman as an Imam, and assigned a woman as a mayor of Medina, and a woman as the head of education of Medina. So you had women in all these different positions where they're less present there now. Is that because it's Islam? Or is it because of other factors? So what I'm saying is that no, it's not Islam. Islam doesn't push women out. Islam recognizes that, yes, men and women are different. We are not obviously the same. We have different needs, different perspectives on things. But at the end of the day, Islam guarantees the equal rights of both male and female. Because every time the Qur'an praises a characteristic, it always mentions both the masculine and the feminine. إِنَّ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتِ the masculine, the feminine. وَالْقَانِتِينَ وَالْقَانِتَاتِ So feminine, masculine, always.
Then how come we're getting this message in the West that, say, the hijab is a way of men controlling women, what they can wear or show, or their freedom and so on? Is that just another complete misunderstanding?
That's definitely, there are circumstances and places like obviously like Afghanistan where with the Taliban, etc., where yes, they are imposing, but we're talking about in general, no, that is not the case. And Islamically, no. Islamically, Islam guarantees the freedom of thought of all people. Look, I'll give you an example. Islam is very much against the consumption of intoxicants, whether it's alcohol or drugs, anything that alters the mind, anything mind altering, the Quran says avoid it. Like you have to stay away from that, right? Yet you had and I do give an example here of one of the Prophet Muhammad's followers. His name was Nu'ayman, and he was addicted to, like he loved his wine. And, when one of his disciples was getting irritated by Nu'aym, he says, this guy's always drinking, curse him or damn him. And the Prophet Muhammad said, do not curse him, for he loves and is beloved by God and his Prophet. And this guy was drinking. So in a sense, you see that the Prophet Muhammad taught us to look beyond these. You have an example of the Prophet Muhammad telling us, contrasting two women. One woman who was praying and fasting and doing all this religious stuff, and yet in the privacy of her own home, she was cruel to a cat. She trapped this cat, she imprisoned, and she caused this cat to die of starvation. In contrast to this woman who was like righteous, veiled and praying and all of this stuff, was another, and of course the example is given about these women. These women were Israelite women, because obviously there was no examples from Islam. So every time we have examples in the Qur'an, they're generally about Jews and Christians, both positive and negative examples, because there were no, our tradition, our leg of the tradition, because we consider ourselves a continuation of this Abrahamic tradition, had not been formed yet. So you can't use examples from us because we didn't exist. So the other example was a prostitute, a woman who basically was a sex worker, didn't pray, didn't do anything, but she's walking in the desert alone. She comes upon a well. She sees a dog on the side of the well panting. She goes into the well, uses her tattered shoe, fills it with water, and goes up several times to quench the thirst of the dog. And the Prophet Muhammad said that God loves this woman, this prostitute who was kind. She wasn't showing it. She was, oh, guys, look at me. I'm doing this act of charity. Look, I'm helping the poor. And, let's see how many likes I'm going to get. She didn't do that. Nobody knew about it. She was alone. There was nobody looking. But she did it from the goodness of her heart. And the Prophet Muhammad said she attained salvation. Whereas the other woman who's sitting there praying and fasting, and everybody's like, oh, wow, she's so righteous. And he said that woman, God was displeased with her because she was cruel. So what really matters, as the Qur'an says, إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. That what really matters at the end of the day, what matters at the judgment and the final judgment, is when you come to God with a complete, a clean, a healthy, a pure heart. God doesn't care about your actions, doesn't care how many times you pray, times you fast, or how righteous
good
you are.
Works.
It's not just the good works that are sincere.
Oh, intention, yes, of course.
Yeah, because sure, if your good works start to show off because, oh, look at me, I'm better than everybody else, then
along these lines of a horrible subject, female genital mutilation, what do you make of that? Why is that happening? How much is it happening?
Well, female genital mutilation is not an Islamic practice. It is an ancient practice that goes back to the time of the cult of Isis. Speaking of Isis, but this is the other Isis. Isis, the
Egyptian
goddess.
god.
Yeah, the goddess Isis.
Yeah,
and this was basically part of their tradition, and it remained in Egypt. And it was practiced in Egypt and also in certain parts of East Africa. Islamic scholars have condemned it. The highest Islamic authorities in Egypt have condemned it. The same thing in Somalia and other places. Yet it's still being practiced. And a lot of people don't know this, but it's mainly perpetrated by women. Like, men are not doing this. So they wait until the father, who's in most cases, fathers are against this. They don't want this to happen to their daughters. Wait until the father's out of town or out of the picture somewhere, and they do it while he's gone. So he can't.
Why are they doing
it? In their way, they think they're trying to protect her chastity, whatever it is, because but it's a cruel.
Has it happened to them too? The women are doing it.
Yeah,
had it done to them.
A lot of them have had it happen to them, and it continues. But it is not an Islamic practice, actually anti-Islam. Islamic scholars have condemned it. And, the Qur'an is very clear. Anything that is harmful, we are supposed to avoid, is forbidden. And anything that's beneficial, then it is, it's open. You can do it, you cannot do it. But anything that is harmful, we're forbidden to do. Of course, men are circumcised, which is in connection to the ancient tradition of Abraham and the continuation of what the Jews do. But women for circumcision is not permissible in Islam. And even with men's circumcision, it's supposed to be done in a delicate way where there's no harm, etc. And of course, the purpose of why we are circumcised as men is for cleanliness, because cleanliness is very important Islamically for hygiene.
Have you experienced Islamophobia or discrimination or bigotry yourself in Canada as a Muslim?
I mean, I guess I have, but I don't think it's really bothered me. Like I ignore it. I just laugh at when people do say things that are stupid. I don't get upset. I just laugh, like whatever. Like what are you gonna do?
What are you going to do? Yeah.
Somebody's ignorant and they say something stupid about you or your faith. I'll just for me it's a joke. I'll laugh. Like when they have these cartoons making fun of our prophet, I don't get offended at all. Why should I get offended?
Well,
That's not my
who
prophet.
is? Yeah. Okay. That's a
It
good
doesn't
question.
look like him. He never did this behavior. That's somebody
Yeah.
else. Why should
But
I?
who is getting offended? The Charlie Hebdo incident. Who are the people that are offended by this that want to kill cartoonists?
Well, in a lot of cases, it's the people who don't really understand the tradition of the Prophet Muhammad or the Qur'an because they don't know it.
Okay.
Because if you look at the Prophet Muhammad in the Quran says clearly, if you look into the teaching of the Quran, it says وَأَعْرِضْ عَنِ الْجَاهِلِينَ. When people are lowly in their behavior, they're aggressive, they call names. What do? Ignore it. The Prophet Muhammad, when people would say things about, he didn't go and say, oh, he didn't do any of that stuff. He ignored it. One time he was standing, one of his followers, one of his close followers, his name is Abu Bakr. And he's in a session, and there's this man sitting there swearing at Abu Bakr and calling him the worst names. And Abu Bakr is silent, silent, silent. And the Prophet Muhammad is smiling. So then, Abu Bakr starts getting, okay, he gets to a point where he can't handle, he starts to respond. He wants to say, no, that's not true. And the Prophet Muhammad frowned and he walked away. And he said, why did you do that? He said, when you were silent, you were the better man. You were strong, and I respected that. And once you came to respond to someone, because now you're acknowledging, you're giving value to this aggression, to this lowly behavior, then you have degraded yourself, and I don't want to see that. So you see the difference in attitude. That's our prophet. That's how he taught us to be. When people insulted him, when they used to throw garbage in front of his house. One of his neighbors used to throw garbage every morning. Would take like animal intestines, put thorns in it, put it at Muhammad's door. So every morning to get out of his house, he has to remove this stuff, scratch his hands, and one day he gets out of his house and there's no garbage there. And you know what he does? He's worried. He goes to his neighbor, knocks on the door. I'm like, are you okay? Like, he finds out his neighbor's sick. Like, oh, I got worried about you because you didn't throw garbage. And he takes some food and visits him. Okay, that's how he taught us to be. This is our prophet. And if we want to honor the Prophet Muhammad's life and example, we do it by living up to his, none of us are perfect. We're all flawed. I'm more flawed than most people out there, and you accept your flaws. But when you're going to speak in the name of our prophet, when you're going to speak in the name of Islam, then you speak the truth and you do it elegantly.
Out of the 1 billion plus Muslims, how many of them would agree with everything you're saying? How many of them just don't know that much? They just sort of go along. They were raised that way or whatever. And then how many of them disagree and just go, no, you're wrong. I really got to do the terrorism or the female genital mutilation or the whatever it is that we hear so much about, the negative side. I mean, are there surveys and polls? Like I found some about Sharia, in certain countries, 90% of the people think Sharia law should be the law of the land and so on. But it's hard to say on these other things what percentage would, agree with you versus not, or just don't even know.
Well, I think a lot of people don't know much, but my understanding of how Muslims are is that at least at their heart, most people want to do what's right. You have bad people everywhere, and people who are destructive. You're going to find that in every culture, in every religion, in every sect. But the majority of people do. And I've had Muslims of various backgrounds, whether they're Sunnis or Shiites or, Salafites or whatever their school of thought may be. the life of the Qur'an is not out yet, but people who read Muhammad the World Changer, the majority of people loved it. And because that's the prophet we believe in. Even if a lot of people don't understand it, but this is why we love our prophet, because he was an amazing person. His character, the way he behaved with people, the way he treated people, his kindness, his benevolence, his generosity, his humility, all of these people would walk into a room where he's there and they would ask, which of you is Muhammad? He didn't dress different than anyone else. He didn't put himself on a pedestal. He was an ordinary person. And he lived like that. And he lived that example. When he died, he didn't have anything. He had given everything he had to charity, to the poor, to orphans. He died poor. He didn't have anything. Actually, his armor that he needed to get for the few battles that he had to go to, which he didn't really fight in, right? He took that armor before he died and pawned it with a Jewish merchant to get money so he can buy food to feed his family. He didn't care about his armor. That's not what a general does. That's not what a military person does. But that's who our prophet is. And when we speak about Sharia, I already explained to you, this is what Sharia is. So in the psyche of Muslims, Sharia is justice. Sharia is compassion. Sharia is mercy. Sharia is giving women rights, giving security to people, not lying to people, not deceiving them, not hurting people, safety. That's what people think about when they think of Sharia. They're not thinking of extreme. You think anybody would want to live under that? Like, if anybody thinks that that's how people think, they must be insane. But that's what extremist movements promise people. They promise them that if they bring Sharia, at least the understanding of Sharia, according to the Qur'an, the Sharia, and according to our tradition, is a system of justice, a just system of equality, where the king is equal to the pauper. That's what our teachings teach us.
The miracles, the miracle stories attributed to Muhammad, similar to those of Jesus, but different. Flying to heaven on a winged horse and splitting the moon and raising dead soldiers and turning, and so on. What do you make of those?
We don't need miracles. Okay. Our miracle is one. The miracle of our prophet is the Qur'an. This is what every Muslim scholar agrees on. The miracle of our prophet, the proof of his prophethood. How do we know he's a prophet? Because of the teachings of the Qur'an. Because they are guidance. We don't need myths. We don't need legends. We don't need him. And a lot of these so-called miracles were created long after the prophet's death to compete with Christians and Jews and everybody else. Yeah. So every miracle Jesus had done, Muhammad does it and does it better. Everything Moses had done, Muhammad does it and does it better. Right. And then you have thousands of miracles attributed to him. Like, you know what? It's unnecessary, and at the end of the day, it doesn't help.
Interesting.
Lying about somebody because you love them and you want people to respect them is not helpful, because at the end of the day, all it does is takes away from the prophet's amazing personality, who he was. And if you look in my book, I show you who he was. His life, his real life. Every piece of information in this book had to be verified. And, I actually used empirical evidence to verify these stories. And if it's not verified, if there's something that cannot be verified with fact, it's not in here. And the stories of his life are in themselves so inspiring. Because you read this and you're like, I want to be like this person. Because he's a human being. If he's flying and he's doing all of these things, and walking through walls or whatever he's going to do, how can I compete with that?
Yeah,
but
right.
Qur'an tells us that he's our example.
Yeah.
We have to be like him. So he suffers. He goes through difficulty. His sons die. He buries almost all his children with his own hands. He goes through so much suffering. He's injured. He breaks his tooth. His face is cut. Garbage is thrown at him. Rocks are hurled at him. He's hurt in all these different ways because he's a human being. He's flesh and blood. And that's what makes him so special, is that because he was a mortal, he says about himself, I'm a flawed mortal. I'm a flawed human being. Human beings. No, it says, Kullu bani Adam khata. Every human being makes mistakes. There's no perfect human being. No, and the Prophet, the Qur'an gives examples of the prophets making mistakes and doing things. Yeah, prophets don't sin, and the concept of sin is basically when you intentionally, maliciously want to do something that's harmful or bad or like against God or against people. That's what a sin is. But mistakes, we all make them. And you know what? We also sin. But the prophets are human beings. Islamically, they are mortals, just like us. And they exemplify how to, like, we look at the story of Moses. He's Moses. And the Quran doesn't shy away from how Moses' rage. He had a really bad temper.
Well, Mohamad, you've been very generous with your time. You've given me three times as much time as...
on the ground. He grabs his brother's beard. He's pulling at him. He's yelling at him, slapping his brother in front of the Israelites. He's so angry. But he's the beloved of God. This is the same guy who kills the Egyptian foreman. Like, he has so much rage. But you know what? He had a good heart. And he had, and at the end of the day, no human being is perfect. The Quran doesn't try to make them sound like, oh, they're perfect, they're above. They're human beings, and they suffered, just like us.
Yeah, nicely put, Mohamad. I was just saying you've been generous with your time. You gave me three times as much time as your publicist said you had, so I really appreciate that. I couldn't find that much biographical material on you. Do you have like a congregation that you're religious services every week, or?
I did for 26 years. Mm-hmm. I have been retired.
What? You look so young. Are you kidding me?
No, I'm probably older than you.
No, you're not. I'm 69. You're not older than me.
Maybe I'm 80.
No.
But anyways.
So you're a full-time writer now?
Yes, I'm a full-time writer, and I do have another book in mind after these. Hopefully,
you got to, because you got to have a trilogy.
Yes, I do have other books that I had written before. When I was chief Imam and when I served as headmaster of several academies, I wrote books on different Islamic topics: the classical Arabic language, its grammar, its syntax, its history, exegesis, Islamic law. All of these different topics I had written about in the past. But these are for a popular audience. They're written for all people, whether they're Muslim or not.
So what's the next one?
The next one, the topic is going to be female centric. So basically, it's about women in Islam.
Oh,
and
nice.
I want to, I'm still formulating the idea, but basically, it's going to highlight, just like in this book. I highlighted the Prophet and you can see the women, but the women are in the background. So now I'm going to zoom in on the women, on Khadija, the amazing woman, Baraka, the African formerly enslaved woman who basically raises the Prophet. She's there the day he's born. She is his one of his closest advisors throughout his life, and she's there the day he dies. And she's an advisor to two of his successors. So she's an amazing, remarkable woman. And so she'll be highlighted in the next book. And I also have the Prophet's daughter, Fatima, who's a remarkable woman as well. And all these other women who inspired the Prophet, who supported him, who were inspired by him, who upheld his legacy. And also... all the women scholars that we had across time that people will know about. By the way, Bibi al-Harthamiya, I do speak about her. I have an article online about the hidden heritage of Islamic women. So if anybody wants, they can read it.
Okay.
But I do mention several examples.
Nice. That's an important subject. And if all Muslims thought like you, then I don't think we'd have much of a political issue that we do. So I hope people read your book.
This way, I don't think there are people who are genuinely, bigoted and hate people. But I think the majority of people who think they hate Islam don't hate Islam. They actually, if they knew what Islam really was, if they knew the Prophet, they would love him, because unless you're, you're really set in your ways, which is fine, which you're right to have. I think the majority of people can identify with the Prophet Muhammad's teachings and who he was as a human being, and also with the teachings of the Qur'an.
Nice. Well, there it is, The Life of the Qur'an, From Eternal Roots to Enduring Legacy. We will release this on the pub date of the book. I hope it does well for you, and I hope everybody, Muslim and otherwise, reads the book. It's important to get these myths debunked and understand what the religion really says. So thank you for that. Thank you for your work. All right, Mohamad.